Major developments are unfolding regarding a potential agreement between the United States and Iran, and the debate surrounding it is already intense. Critics argue that any deal with Iran is dangerous, insisting that continued pressure is the only path forward. Some analysts have gone even further, claiming that military action was always going to be necessary to force Iran into accepting terms that would permanently prevent it from pursuing nuclear weapons. Their concern is simple. A signed piece of paper means very little if there is no way to enforce it. For years, skeptics have warned that Iran could agree to restrictions while secretly continuing activities behind the scenes. That fear remains at the center of the discussion, even as reports suggest that negotiations have moved closer to a final agreement than ever before.
President Trump, however, is presenting a very different picture. According to him, the negotiations have resulted in what he describes as a major breakthrough. He has repeatedly emphasized that the core objective was always preventing Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, and that the current framework achieves exactly that. Trump stated that the documents are nearly complete, with a signing expected in the near future, potentially in Europe. He pointed to positive market reactions, rising stock prices, and falling oil prices as signs that investors believe the agreement will bring greater stability to the region. In his view, the entire purpose of the military and diplomatic pressure campaign was to ensure that Iran could never possess a nuclear weapon, and he believes that goal has now been achieved. The administration also highlighted extensive conversations with regional leaders across the Middle East. According to Trump, countries including Qatar, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Kuwait, and others have been supportive of efforts to secure a lasting agreement. He described the atmosphere as one focused on peace and stability rather than continued conflict. Trump even praised Pakistan's leadership while discussing the broad international support surrounding the negotiations. The message from the White House is that this is not simply a bilateral agreement between Washington and Tehran, but part of a larger regional effort aimed at reducing tensions and creating a more stable future for the Middle East. Despite those assurances, many observers continue to question whether the agreement could ultimately strengthen Iran. Critics argue that any easing of restrictions or reduction of pressure could provide the regime with additional resources and breathing room. They worry that financial relief, reopened trade routes, or reduced sanctions might allow Tehran to rebuild its influence and eventually return to old patterns of behavior. Those concerns were raised directly during questioning of the president. Trump responded by insisting that the agreement includes firm commitments from Iran, not only to refrain from developing nuclear weapons, but also from purchasing them or pursuing them in any form whatsoever. According to the administration, those guarantees are at the heart of the entire arrangement. One of the most significant moments came when Trump suggested that recent military actions played a decisive role in bringing Iran to the negotiating table. He argued that the Iranian leadership had been placed under extraordinary pressure and had suffered major setbacks, leaving them far more willing to negotiate than before. According to the president, Iran now wants the deal even more than the United States does. He described the agreement as beneficial not only for America and its allies, but ultimately for the Iranian people as well. Trump went so far as to suggest that recent changes within Iran's leadership structure have created a different environment, one that may be more open to practical decision-making than previous administrations. Supporters of the administration point to this as evidence that the strategy has worked exactly as intended. They argue that the objective was never endless war or regime destruction through occupation. Instead, they claim the goal was to create enough pressure to force meaningful concessions while avoiding a large-scale ground conflict. From this perspective, the current situation represents a significant achievement. Iran's military capabilities have reportedly been degraded, its ability to pursue a nuclear weapon has been restricted, and negotiations have produced commitments that seemed impossible only months ago. Advocates believe this demonstrates that a combination of military deterrence and diplomatic leverage can achieve results without requiring prolonged military involvement. Another key element involves the role of neighboring countries. Administration officials emphasized that regional governments have significant influence over Iran and are actively encouraging a final agreement. This creates pressure from multiple directions rather than leaving the United States isolated in its demands. Analysts argue that such regional support could make it much more difficult for Iran to back away from its commitments.
If neighboring countries view the agreement as essential for regional stability, Tehran risks not only conflict with Washington, but also strained relationships with countries throughout the Middle East if it chooses not to comply. Questions remain about what happens if Iran changes course after signing. Administration officials have made it clear that military options remain available if Tehran violates its commitments. Some former officials have suggested that additional strikes, stronger enforcement measures, and even actions targeting strategic assets could be considered if Iran attempts to restart prohibited activities. The message being sent is that the agreement comes with accountability mechanisms and consequences. According to supporters of the deal, this combination of diplomacy backed by credible military force is what convinced Iran to negotiate in the first place, and what will keep the agreement effective moving forward. Economic factors are also playing a major role in the discussion. Officials argue that while certain restrictions may eventually be adjusted under the terms of an agreement, significant leverage remains in place. The administration maintains that any economic relief would be tied directly to compliance and verification. Supporters believe this creates incentives for cooperation, while preserving the ability to reimpose pressure if necessary. They argue that a more stable Iran, integrated into the regional economy, could reduce tensions and improve living conditions for ordinary citizens, while limiting the government's ability to pursue aggressive policies abroad. Ultimately, the debate comes down to one central question. Has enough pressure been applied to fundamentally change Iran's behavior? Supporters of the agreement believe the answer is yes. They argue that Iran has lost much of its military leverage, accepted restrictions on its nuclear ambitions, and now faces pressure not only from the United States, but from neighboring countries as well. Critics remain unconvinced and warn that only time will reveal whether these commitments are genuine. What is clear is that the coming days could determine the future direction of one of the most significant geopolitical confrontations of the modern era. If the agreement is finalized and implemented successfully, it could reshape the balance of power in the Middle East and create a path toward greater stability after years of tension and uncertainty.